Welcome back to another live with Diabetes 180. Today's topic is one that's going to be very important for anybody who has any form of diabetes. So, whether that's type 1 diabetes, type 2 diabetes, pre-diabetes. Now, of course, you might be wondering, well, type 1 diabetics can't reverse their diabetes. So, how can I benefit from this session? But what you're going to learn is the root cause of insulin resistance and how to reverse that. And that, in if, whether or not you're type 1 or type 2 or pre-diabetic, is the key to reversing the what's called insulin resistance and the cause of type 2 diabetes and the cause of the worsening of type 1. So those who have type 1 diabetes are insulin dependent, and they're going to be insulin dependent for life, but you can make your body sensitive to insulin again so that you need less insulin throughout your life. And there's a lot of benefits to that, but we're going to show you how and why in this live. So as always, we always send a reminder to post in the chat if you have questions. If you have also just comments about what we're talking about, I'll be able to watch as I present. I'll be watching the chat. All right. First thing I always ask is who's watching? Where are you watching from? Definitely say hi, because I always like to greet longtime viewers of this live, and share this after watching. Share the link with others, because it will be re-recorded for you to watch later. All right. Don't be shy. This is live for a reason. I make these live so that we can have a conversation. It's just not me talking to a camera, right? So this is where you can get your questions answered, especially if you have diabetes. But I believe whether or not you're a diabetic, you could benefit from this talk, because insulin resistance, again, you'll hear us talk about insulin resistance a lot, is a root cause of many chronic conditions, not just diabetes. So in eating to reverse insulin resistance, making you more sensitive to insulin, you are reversing and preventing a lot of chronic illnesses, a lot of conditions and diseases, right? So actually, hope you guys can hear me, because I have the washing machine going off right now. So in the chat, let me know if that's too loud. I'll go take it off, okay? So if you guys are distracted by the sound of dishes washing, just let me know. I'll go shut it off. It's right behind this wall, so it's kind of loud. But the way I'm going to do this we're going to do a presentation, a PowerPoint. We don't always do PowerPoints, but it's nice to do PowerPoints because you get to kind of see and visualize what I'm talking about, but also be able to take notes on what I'm talking about. Okay. There's a lot of talk today about carbs being the cause of diabetes. You have diabetes because you eat too much carbs. How many of us have heard that before? How many of us have heard that you have diabetes or you're pre-diabetic because you eat too many carbs? If you cut out carbs, if you go on a low carb diet, then you're going to reverse your diabetes. If you don't do that, you have no chance. How many have heard that? Let me know in the chat. Another question I have is, anyone on the fence whether or not diabetes can be reversed? I know there's probably some people who feel that diabetes can't be reversed, that it's something that you just got to live with. Luckily, I mean, that's the old way of thinking. A lot of people are realizing that diabetes is not a condition you have to live with. For the most of us who have been diagnosed with this devastating disease, it really is. There is hope, okay, for the vast majority of you. The reason I say vast majority, well, I should say all of us, but when it comes to reversal, first thing I always tell people is, the more you comply with the recommendations I give, the more likely you are to reverse this disease. Now, there are people who have different levels of diabetes. There's type 1.5, where the autoimmune is destroying the immune system, is destroying the pancreas and creating antibodies against insulin. So you may have to inject insulin for life if you're in that spectrum. Okay. If you're type 1 diabetic, of course, you're going to need insulin for life, right? If you're type 2 diabetic, you don't need insulin, right? You're, by adopting these dietary recommendations, these changes that I'm going to suggest tonight, you're going to find that your medication use will drop, right? Very quickly. You'll find that you don't need medications. If you are insulin dependent, even if you are insulin dependent, the amount of insulin that you need is going to go down drastically. I promise you. Follow my advice. This is something that I've experienced with my wife, who's reversed diabetes in 6 weeks after having diabetes for 8 years, with many clients for the last 2 years who have come through our program. So I hope just that if you stop watching right now, that answers the question, which is the title of our talk today. Can diabetes be reversed? I've seen it. I've witnessed it in my home. I've witnessed it with patients coming through my clinic, personal clients I've coached. I've seen it done. Okay. So if that's you want to experience that, then let me know in the chat. Let me know. All right. So Joan says, hello, watching from Boston. Hello, Joan. Sharon Elkins. Hello. Hello. So let's go get right into it. We try to keep our lives pretty short. We try not to go too long into our live sessions. All right. So again, ask questions. This is supposed to be a conversation, so I'm not just talking to the camera. But so the idea that I started out with, or the question I started out with, is what is the cause of diabetes? Is it carbs, right? That's probably what we've heard, that carbs is a cause of diabetes. But the reality is, even though carbs does play a role in the development of diabetes, fat has a much larger role. Okay, fat is actually the center role of what causes type 2 and prediabetes. Now, why I think it's important to know the cause is because in understanding the cause, you can know how to reverse it, right? If you think about it, like if you have a conflict with somebody, right? If you want to squash that conflict, you got to know why you were fighting in the first place, right? You have to find out what caused the disconnect so you can reconnect. So understanding the cause, the fat connection, we can reconnect, right? We could find out what we need to do, and it's very easy. It's very simple, right? It's not complicated to reverse diabetes. Once we know the cause, we could find the cure. So the fat connection is nothing new. As early as 1920s, there's been research published on the damaging effects of high-fat diets on insulin function. So that gives us an idea of what's causing the problem. In 1950s, Dr. Walter Kemper reversed type 2 diabetes with a low-fat diet. Now, this is interesting. In this diet, he wasn't even the end point wasn't really to reverse diabetes. He did it by accident. What he was trying to do was reverse high blood pressure, because in those days, if I'm not mistaken, they did not have the slew of drugs to lower blood pressure that we have today. So high blood pressure, hypertension was deadly. So he put his patients, his hypertensive patients, on a strictly carb diet. So they had fruits and sugar. Rice, fruits, and sugar. So it was a rice fruit diet. So they had no fat or very little fat, and it was a carb-centered diet. Just the things that diabetics are not told to eat. That's what they ate, and lo and behold, not only did their blood pressure drop, but their diabetes was reversing. Right, so that you had people coming into this research and this program with type 2 diabetes and leaving without it, going on a strict low-fat diet that's centered around carbs. I know it's crazy. It doesn't make sense, because carbs is a cause of diabetes. You mean if I eat nothing but carbs, it gets better? All right. 1970s, Dr. James Anderson reduced or eliminated insulin with type 1 diabetics, but with a low-fat, high-fiber diet. So this is not new. Okay, it's not like some breaking information, breaking news. There has long been understood a fat connection when it comes to the cause of diabetes. So just fast forwarding to the end of, if you remove the fat, the dietary fat from your food intake, diabetes can be reversed, right? It's not just the fat that you wear, because we always know, okay, we got to lose weight. We know that. It's not just the fat that you're wearing that does cause a problem, yes, but it's also the fat that we're eating, and we just get too much of it, right? So by the end of this talk, I'll make sure that you have a blueprint, a traffic light guide or food list I'll give that to you guys so you know what to buy, what to shop. How do I go on a low-fat diet? What does it look like? You'll get to know at the end. I promise you, you stick with that diet. Within days, if not weeks, you'll start to see your blood sugar start to normalize if you follow the advice strictly. All right, so just going through more studies to show you that this is not something new. This is not something made up just last year or within the last few years, but major health publications and health institutions have been trying to alert us to the root cause of diabetes. American Diabetes Association in this article talks about the effect of dietary fat on insulin in type 1 diabetics. This articles, I'm just going to go quickly through these articles because I want you to see the depth of research that has gone into this concept, because unfortunately it's still so misunderstood today. So Clinical Nutrition and Metabolic Care, this news article talks about muscle insulin resistance and how assault by lipids and cytokines, that's basically chemical messengers that cause inflammation within the muscle. This inflammation then causes insulin resistance. Science Direct, Dietary Fats and Prevention of Type 2 Diabetes. I'm just going through these quickly. This article talks about how substituting saturated fat with unsaturated healthy plant fats changes your abdominal fat distribution and improves your insulin sensitivity. So that's another thing. By switching over to plant-based foods, that's why we encourage that. You're switching from saturated fat, which is mainly found in animal foods and animal byproducts like dairy and cheese, and you're switching over to healthy unsaturated fats, and insulin sensitivity does go up. This is actually my favorite study to talk about. Is the European Perspective investigation into cancer and nutrition. Yep. So this study has, I think, a total of 500,000 people involved in it, more than 500,000 people involved in it. And what they were trying to see is how does diet, how does nutrition play a role into cancer, of course, and other chronic illnesses. And this is key. Of the 500,000 plus people researched on diet and nutrition, and on nutrition and insulin resistance specifically in diabetes, just replacing 5%, just 5%, I mean, that's a small amount of saturated fat, mainly from, of course, meat, dairy, eggs, and cheese, with fructose. And that's from fruit or refined carbs, refined sources, even the refined carbs. If you took 5% of your saturated fat and replaced that with carbs, your risk of developing diabetes goes down by 30%. And this study took over decades in researching these diets, okay? This is a very large, very long study, and it proves a point, a very strong point. The more you take saturated fat out of your diet, even if you're replacing it with carbs, your risk of diabetes goes down significantly. 5% reduction brought about a 30% reduction in the chances of getting diabetes. So you can imagine if you replaced all saturated fat, because the reality is plant foods have very little saturated fat, especially when they're in their whole food state, where they're not refined and highly processed. When you're eating a whole food plant-based diet, you are naturally lowering your saturated fat intake by a lot more than 5%. So you can imagine how this risk reduction increases like almost incrementally to the amount of fat you're taking out of your diet. And interesting enough, in the same study, they found the same effect or very similar effect with protein. So this shows you that it's not just the fat, but also protein does play a role, specifically animal protein. We've talked about that in the past. We'll definitely talk more about animal protein in the future, but replacing 5% of protein with carbs also reduced diabetes risk by 28%. So I don't know if that's anything new to anyone. Has anyone ever heard these studies? Certainly, I definitely, the first time I heard these studies, I said to myself, well, why doesn't the public know about these things? Why is this not like common knowledge? Why am I, even especially as a physician, still hearing that carbs are to blame? But the reality is, and I hate that I have to say it, is this food industry influence. Food industry influence is powerful, and they have a big effect on or influence on what reaches the public, what news reaches the public. All right, what health organizations are promoting and saying, what news broadcasters are announcing. So they do the last thing meat dairy industry wants, and these multi-billion-dollar corporations that make money off of us eating more saturated fat and protein, they do not want a general announcement that we need to decrease our consumption of those foods, because you are literally putting multi-billion-dollar companies at risk. So it's up to us to get this information, empower us with this knowledge, and find the change that we wish to see in the world. All right, so it's up to us to find this change. And so I like to highlight these studies to show you that this is not something that is just made up, and this is just some studies. There's so many studies that show that the cause of diabetes is not carbs, but it is dietary fat intake, right, with saturated fat being the key fat to limit and avoid. This is actually interesting. So this study from Cambridge University showed that they were actually able to induce insulin resistance in rats by giving them a high fat diet. So they found basically if they wanted to make make a rat a diabetic or insulin resistant, all they had to do was feed them fat, and not very long, right? So we are literally eating our way towards diabetes, even if we're not diabetic. A lot of us are eating our way towards it, right? I would say on average, if you were to take, I don't know how many of you guys use track your food intake with food logs, but if you were to track your food intake, most of us have a dietary fat intake of at least 30%. That's actually on the conservative end. Probably the majority of us may be closer to 50% of our diet being fat. And this is even those of us who think we're eating healthy. So I really encourage you, if you're going to do anything, track your fat intake, right? And bring it down. And how much you might ask, you should have no more than 15%. If you really want to reverse insulin resistance, you want 15% of your fat intake your caloric intake to come from fat. So we're almost done here. Actually, it's going to be a pretty short live because it's not even complicated. In the future, what I'm going to try to do is give more scientific explanations of the biochemistry of what happens with insulin resistance, because I think that's fun. The biochemistry of this thing is fun. We'll get into it a little bit actually right now, just in the last couple slides. So I don't know how many of you have heard this explanation. This is like the simple explanation of why fat is a problem. But if insulin is the key that unlocks the cell's door so that sugar or glucose can go in, then fat is essentially like gumming up the lock. Okay, so it's not that the sugar is a problem. The sugar seems like it's a problem because every time you eat something with sugar in it, right, carbs, it gets stuck in the blood, right? It doesn't get in the cell. But what you don't realize is that it's not the sugar's problem. The sugar wants to go in. It's the locking mechanism is being gummed up. And what is it being gummed up by? It's being gummed up by fat. Okay. And this happens in different ways. We'll talk about more on the science of it in future lives, but it's really fascinating. The whole science of insulin resistance is complex and it's fascinating. I love it. I should say I love it. I hate it that it affects so many people, but just understanding it is really fun. So you have insulin on the outside of the cell that's being resisted. And by the fat that's inside the cell, right? The fat that's causing inflammation is disrupting mitochondria. The free radical damage leads to damage to the DNA within the cell, right? So now your body can't create what it needs to get the sugar in, right? This is something that's kind of a multi-stage process, right? There's a lot of reasons why fat becomes a problem, or too much fat, I should say, becomes a problem. There's what they call glucose transporters, right? That are essentially proteins that take the sugar from outside the cell and pull them in, those transporters are decreased. They're not functioning right. So there's so many ways that fat becomes a problem, and it becomes a problem in very specific tissues in the body too. So there are certain tissues that are just not designed to store large amounts of fat. If you think about our muscles, right? Our muscles are made to move, right? Our muscles are made to keep us going from one place to the other. It's probably the most metabolically active, most metabolically functioning organ of our body, right? And it's not made or meant to store large amounts of fat, right? Its main source of energy that it wants to use is sugar, because it's quick to burn sugar. Sugar and carbs are a very efficient fuel system. But when too much fat gets stored in the muscle, right, and you can actually do biopsies in muscle tissue, and they've done this, take biopsies out of the muscles and measure how much fat is in the muscle and correlate the amount of fat in your muscle to the amount of insulin resistance in your body, right? Because too much excess fat in these muscle tissues leads to insulin resistance, insulin being resisted. Pancreas and liver are the two organs that are also where we're not meant to store excess fat, right? Think of fatty liver disease, right? So the pancreas and the liver, the two organs that are key when it comes to digestion and metabolism, right? Being right next to the stomach, right? The stomach would be laying right there in the middle. So as nutrients come in, right? If there's too much fat in the lock system, you can imagine how this wreaks havoc, right? And so you might have heard that it's not, it's not really fat. It's carbs, because carbs makes you fat, right? How many of you have heard that carbs make you fat? We know fat is a problem, but carbs makes you fat. I mean, just think about this a little bit. Fat doesn't make you fat. Carbs make you fat. Just think about that a little bit. I don't know, but it is true though. I don't want to give a green light to sugar and say, yeah, go ahead and down Dr. Pepper, right, and Pepsi. No. Yes, you can easily cause fat to develop in your liver by over consuming calories from carbs. But this is the difference I want to highlight. Sugar isn't the main problem, because if you overeat calories from carbs, liver fat can increase by about 33%, according to studies, right? But if you overeat the same amount of calories in fat, liver fat increases by 55%. So fat is the bigger problem, right? The body doesn't need to do so much to transition or to convert fat into fat, because fat is already fat. However, when it comes to carbs, the body has to do more to convert it to fat. Yeah, carbs can turn into fat, but it takes a lot more energy to do that. So the body is a lot better at taking fat from your diet and storing it away in your muscle and your liver. And how many of us can agree, or by experience, that you can find fat anywhere in the body? The body will find anywhere it needs to store fat. Okay. We got no more place in your gut. Don't worry, you got your hips and your butt, right? Even you got your ankles and your neck, your chin, right there. The body is amazing at storing fat. It's very easy to store fat, right? Where the muscles are a little different, right? But fat can be stored anywhere. The body can literally turn anywhere in your body into a fat storage cabinet. So you can see how if we have too much fat in our diet, the body will store it away in tissues not designed to store it. And this leads to insulin resistance through the process of inflammation and mitochondrial dysfunction. So what do we do in closing this live tonight? Lewis, okay, I get it. It's fat. Hopefully you get it. Anyone disagree with me? Anyone stop me now? You guys are quiet. So I'm hoping it's because you understand the science of this. But yeah, knowledge is power. So reducing dietary fat intake to 30 grams a day, right? And I guarantee most of us, even if we are vegetarian, okay, because even vegan foods, some of them have too much fat in them, right? If we can reduce our fat intake though to 30 grams a day, which would be about 15% of our total calorie intake, daily calorie intake, you would find that the body starts to burn away the stored fat, right? The fat in our muscle, the fat in our liver, it's fat in our pancreas that needs to start going away will start going away. And it happens very fast, okay? Now, the only problem with this, even though it's simple, I'm not saying it's easy. Has anyone ever tried to keep their fat intake to 15%? I'm not saying it's easy. It definitely is a challenge when you think about how easy it is to find fat, even in plant foods, okay? But this is a key that you can have access to is as a guide, I should say, a visual guide on how to do just that, how to get your fat intake to 15% of your daily calories. Follow this guide. I'll also share here QR code link. Let me see if it's going to show. Yeah. So this is a QR code link. If you want to scan, this code would not only give you this front page of the document, but also a long list of foods that you can start shopping for, knowing that it's in the green. Also a list of foods to avoid because they're in the red, and foods to have in moderation because they're in yellow. Right. So if you want that document, scan the QR code. If you're watching on your phone, I guess you probably just have to take a screenshot and scan it later. So Sharon asks a great question. How much olive oil can we have a day? That's a very good question. Now, for my clients that I coach, most of them really find the best results when they get rid of olive oil. Okay. There are some people who maybe they're not so insulin resistant that they can tolerate olive oil. That's fine. That's you. But if you've reached a point where you've done all you can and your sugars are still high, right? If you've gotten rid of the animal-based foods, you're eating mainly whole complex carbs, and you're still finding that your sugars are high, it's time to get rid of the oil. Right. So Sharon, it really depends. If I'll get rid of the bigger problem foods in the red first. Okay. While you're doing that, maybe still moderate your olive oil use. You'll find it a lot easier if you're tracking your fat intake to get to the 15% mark when you get rid of oil, because you really don't need it. You don't. That's the crazy thing. I know this is probably news for us, but you can cook without oil. You can cook without oil. It really can. There are obviously certain things that you can't do. You can't deep fry without oil, but you don't want to be doing that anyway. But you can cook without oil. The same amount of oil you would use to saute or to cook something, use water or vegetable broth. Okay. Some people, I like to use soy sauce and non-stick pans. Of course, non-stick pans are helpful. But yeah, I mean, you won't miss it. So don't use the oil. All right, so use this as a guide, scan the QR code, and then we'll make sure that you have access to a guide to eat this way. It's not easy. I know that it's not easy. But that being said, we also have another opportunity for us to find strength in numbers, all right? And that's through, let me see if I have it here. I might have to share the screen. Through a community. So many of us struggle to do things alone. I mean, it's natural. We were made to be a community. So if you want to find strength in numbers, and then my advice would be to join a community of people who are trying to reverse diabetes this way through a plant-based diet. By scanning this QR code and also leave the link in the chat, you'll have an invitation to join my Diabetes 180 community. Every 2 weeks, we're coming together to make plans, to strategize, to encourage each other, to motivate each other to stay on track, because there's strength in numbers. Okay, there's strength in numbers. You may have gotten diabetes alone, but you're not going to be able to reverse it alone. You need help. So join this community, scan the QR code, check the link that's right here also in the chat. It'll be right here. Okay, but scan the QR code. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to show that one. Share this link with other people, so who might also benefit from being a part of a community that's dedicated to eating a whole food, plant-based diet. And I think I have one more comment. Let me look at that here. I'll make sure we didn't get. If you guys have any questions before we close off, please, this is the time to ask them. What you're going to have too on these community meetups is an opportunity to have your questions answered. Because a lot of times you don't really know what questions you have until you're in the process of changing your lifestyle. So we're going to be here twice. We're going to meet together twice a week. Sorry, twice a month to answer questions as you're transitioning towards a diabetes reversing diet. So that's something you get from this community. All right, but Sharon asked, does oil go into the body when you put it in the outside of? Well, that's a good question. Generally, I would say it's safe to use topically. I don't think there's enough absorption to get enough into your bloodstream to affect to then be absorbed in those organs that we're trying to keep them from being absorbed. So yeah, topical olive oil, it is great. I don't know. I think I use it a few times for back pain it is a good topical treatment, but let's leave it there. All right. I guess that's all the questions we got for the night, but we will be here doing these lives every Monday, different topics. A lot of times I'll bring on guest speakers. Next week, we'll have a personal trainer who is also a plant-based coach, and she's going to give you tips on training and losing weight naturally, and also, of course, reversing diabetes. So make sure you watch that live next week. But that's all we got for tonight, beloved. I pray above all things that you may prosper and be in good health, even as your soul prospers. We'll see you next week.